Welcome to the Total Boss Podcast, and I'm your host, Christiano Green, a podcast where we talk about finding fulfillment through self-development, being a leader of your own life, and getting the most out of it as well. Tenacity, originality, talent, authenticity, and being legendary. It's all about living your best life. Hello, all you total bosses out there, and welcome to another episode of the Total Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Christiano Green, and I'm a shadow healer and life coach for gay men. So this week on the podcast, we're having a topic related to gay men in religion and spirituality. And we've got a guest on. I'm going to introduce him in just a moment, but I just wanted to talk about where this kind of came from, because I posted a question on Facebook a couple of weeks back, and it was around, what role do you find spirituality and religion play as you as a gay man? And I got a lot of responses. And Danniel Oickle here, who I'm introducing right now, was one response that I got that I just was like really blown away with, and I really wanted to have a chat with him about it. And so instead of just me having a one-on-one chat about it, I thought, let's get him on the podcast, because I believe that this topic is relevant to so many of us out there. So welcome, Danniel. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So, Danniel, I know, like I said, we had a little back and forth in the comments relating to your experience in Christianity, growing up as a gay man within a religious family. So, do you want to maybe give people a little bit of a background about your experience in the church and as a gay man growing up?
Absolutely. I'll give them a little bit of a little bio. So I'm 43. I came out in the 90s and to a religious family. We were, how I describe it was, we were Bible thumping Baptists. We did church in the morning and evening on Sundays. We had Bible studies Wednesday, youth group Fridays and Saturdays. And then due to some family trauma, my brother, sister, and I were all homeschooled as well. Okay. So then we became it became a sense that a lot of our social activities were church related. So when I discovered that, I mean, that's always an irony because I kind of always knew, but when I finally admitted to myself that I was queer, it was very troubling because it did not fit with the stringent life plan that I had been taught all my life up to that point that I was supposed to adhere to. And so then when I did finally come out to myself and my family and my friends and move into, more of a queer lifestyle, I started to challenge that in my artwork and with my writing. And since then, it has had some backlash, and both positive and negative. I think ultimately it's positive, though. I think challenging paradigms is important. I think if we don't ask ourselves why we believe something, then there's really no point in believing it because you don't have a justification for it. Exactly. And so I'm always interested to hear how people justify their belief systems, particularly when it comes to something that's non-falsifiable, like religion. So since you can't prove that it's false, you can't prove that it's true, then it's like, why do you get to that conclusion that you believe this? So since I got to the conclusion that I didn't, it was interesting to hear that some people still do. They still end up with a queer life and a religious life, not just a queer life and a spiritual life. So that's sort of where it stemmed with the Facebook discussion was not really between me and different people as far as arguing goes. I try to limit that these days. I'm a little more mature than I was when I was younger, and I thought that I could just battle everything forward, on social media, especially back when it first came out, right? You go in there with the big fist and then see if I can bang it all down, and it doesn't always work. And you usually get to people that are going to agree with you, and you don't end up convincing anyone of your opinion when you just go in with a heavy fist. So I'm more nuanced these days, let's put it that way. So I didn't go on to all the different things and say all the things I was thinking when I had different people's responses or in private messages as well. So I usually just let them say their piece these days, but I'm not afraid of saying mine either.
It's a beautiful place to be because, as you said, all these, you're interested in people's different belief systems that they have and they hold.
Mhm.
And we kind of know from a bit of research and data that, over 80% of our belief systems aren't our own. We didn't choose them ourselves. We've been given them from family,
Mhm.
from religion, from society, from media, right? And so to be
Absolutely.
able to get there and question those beliefs is an important part of, I guess, maturing, I believe, in a spiritual way, because that's when you then get to a place of spirituality, it's I know what I'm choosing to believe from the information that I've chosen to seek out instead of what's been fed to me in a sense, right?
I might have an answer as to why I chose that, as opposed to people saying, well, I was raised, Baptist. I'm Baptist because I was raised Baptist. Well, that's not an answer. Like,
Exactly.
I mean, if, using their own beliefs to discuss their own beliefs, if you're going to make it to heaven and you're going to be standing in front of St. Peter and you're going to be answering to him what it's like uh, to believe in God and what your journey was, and your journey's answer is because my parents told me to, you think that is enough? And so I don't think it is. I think you need to question these things in your life. It's too easy just to go through with blinders on and accept things that are fed to you. And of course, there are people who emotionally can't do more. Let's just put it that way. Maybe they intellectually can't do more. But most of us don't have that excuse.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd love to kind of go back to a bit of the middle ground, the beginning part. So let's just say we've got listeners out there which we will, who have no idea about the Christian views on homosexuality, etc. So for you as a young gay man, what was it that was told to you about homosexuality from the church?
For us growing up, my parents were they were very intellectual people to start with. So although we were surrounded by a very staunchly religious community, and my parents did, reflect that back, they themselves were willing to challenge and be thoughtful and stuff. So on one hand, I got a very loving message from my parents that they will love me no matter who or what or whatever I am, but gay was never one of those options, right?
And you
So
saw
you
that
had
as,
this yeah, it was kind of not discussed. I remember my mom coming back from the hairdresser and she would discuss her pink hairdresser, and I had no idea at like 9 years old what a pink hairdresser was. And I'm envisioning someone who's like pink or has pink hair or only
of
wears
course,
pink. And
that's
I'm like, what? And I don't understand that that's slang for gay. And said with just the slightest little bit of disdain, which was very unusual for my mom. And but at the same time, he was her favorite hairdresser, and she only went to him, right? So it was like this dichotomy. And then in church, you'd hear, well, if you're gay, you're going to go to hell. That's it. It's pretty simple.
pretty
You're
straight.
gay, you're going to hell. God will love you, but you can never act on it. And you'll have to be alone, or you'll have to deny it, or go to conversion therapy and become straight. And that's the only lifestyle that God will accept. All the rest of them are sinful.
Mm.
It's pretty simple. Like the message was clear.
There you go. I thought it was pretty simple and straightforward, and yeah, that's what I've
Yeah.
been aware of. But I wasn't sure if there was any deeper nuances that the rest of us hadn't
Well,
been.
there's lots of ways they get to why it's, banned, like, why it's wrong, why it's sinful, all of those different things. And they, depending on your church, can get to those conclusions different ways, but ultimately the conclusion is the same. Yeah, it's sinful, you're going to hell.
Sinful, you're going to hell. Okay. And so then for you as a gay man who said that, a young gay man, young gay teenager who came out in high school, what was that experience like then for you, someone who is in that very vulnerable stage, to then also struggle with the church, but then sounds like it also was a big struggle with the family as well?
I think one of the big turning points for me was when we had a revivalist come to a church that we were at. We had to move provinces due to a court case between my brother and his teacher who had assaulted him. And we were being harassed so much that we had to leave the province and move to a different province because of the newspapers and everything. So we moved to Nova Scotia, and we were in a different church. And of course, one of the things that happened, my father was in the military. So when we did end up moving, one of the first communities we'd ever have would be a church community, right? It's the first thing you find is your church. And then you go to your church, and that's how you make friends. That's where you meet. That's why my parents would make friends. That's how we would make friends. And by this point, we were homeschooled. So we didn't go to school. We didn't make friends at school. We made friends at church or on the street if you happen to be walking down the street. But it was Nova Scotia, right? So it's like I don't know if you know Nova Scotia, but it's beautiful countryside. If you've seen Anne of Green Gables, it looks like that. So people aren't that close in houses, right? So there's not that many kids on the street, maybe, you know. And so it was church. And there was this revivalist that came, and I remember we went to one of his morning preaching, and made me really uncomfortable. And at this point, I maybe was 12. Okay. So I was like, I didn't have words for what being gay was. I didn't have any understanding really of that as a lifestyle. I mean, my first experience with seeing what a gay person was the movie Philadelphia. So, you know, where everyone dies of AIDS. So it's, and that I don't even think was out yet. If it was, I hadn't seen it yet because it would have to come out on VHS, you know, at that time. And I'd have to rent it at the corner store. And of course, my parents would have rented it, right? So, so we went to this church, and I remember he came and he was saying, there was one thing I specifically remember. And he was saying that the reason we have to pray before every meal as well isn't just to thank God, but it's to cleanse the food and the things that were touched by sinners before you're touching them. So if you're going to pick up this box of cereal, well, someone who is a sinner could have like sullied it before you. And so you need to pray over this and release it to God so before you use it. And I just remember thinking, that's fucking crazy. I was only 12. And I remember thinking to we talked about it later at home. My mom said, well, no, I don't really believe that. And she's like, I don't believe that people are dirty like that. And I don't believe that that's a thing. She's like, but you know, there was other good things. And, you know, she went on some other things. I don't really remember what those were, but I do remember that night when they were all going back. And I said to her, I don't feel comfortable going. And she's asked me why. And I said, it just makes me feel sick to my stomach when he's talking. And I can't say why more than that. I said, it's just the things that he's presenting and the emotions that he is instilling in us make me feel ill. And she said, well, then you don't have to go. And that was the first time I remember thinking, I have autonomy to make a choice when it comes to church. That, you know, and my mother will respect it, which she did. And, you know, which would have up till that point felt kind of like absurd. I'm only 12. So, you know, like, you know, you really basically do whatever your parents tell you to do. You know, you don't really get that many choices. And so that gave me a little bit of courage that way. And I kept thinking that moving forward, when there were things that arguably didn't match with how I was feeling, I was then able to, you know, raise them to my parents. But I didn't come out to them in the 90s. I came out to them in my second year of college. So, which would have been like 2001 or 2002, I think. I think it was 2002 because I starred in the musical Hair. I don't know if you know the musical Hair, but I starred in that. And I remember having the discussion before that show. So it was before I started and I was in the summer of 2002. So anyway, but that was because my sister had found out and my brother had basically done a phone call, he's also gay, by the way, which was, Mom, I kissed a boy and I think I like it. And so then, and they reacted really poorly.
To your brother? And it came out first.
My brother did. But he was just starting to experiment. I already had a boyfriend. I just wasn't living at home.
You just
you know, so he told them the first time he experimented, and I had already been seeing people for like at that point 5 years. So I just felt that, and I remember when my mother asked me, because my sister made me promise to her that when she found out that I wouldn't lie to them if they point blank asked me. And I said, okay, if they point blank ask me, I won't lie to them. I said, and she was worried she'd have to lie for me. And I said, you never have to lie for me. Just say, ask Dan. And And so that relieved her of that pressure of having to hold this secret for me. But I said, when my mother finally asked me, and I said, why do you want to know? And she's like, because I want to know my children. And I was like, that's a good answer. Then yes, then yes, I am, and blah, 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 and went on from there. But, and their reaction to me was better than their reaction to my brother. Because I also told them, I said, the reason I didn't tell you was because you reacted so poorly to when Eric came out that I wasn't interested. I did not think you deserved this information.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So over the years, when I did start coming into sort of bloom as an artist, because I'm a multimedia artist and I had a radio show and I wrote a sex column for the paper and I have published 2 books. I'm actually working on a 3rd. My work has been shown internationally. So a lot of the time, I challenge either religious iconography or religious thought in my work. So that has led to some discussions with both, especially with the advent of Facebook, right? And which for me, I think, what was it, 2005 when it came out? Am I correct with that?
Something I think it's 2005, 2007, somewhere around there.
Okay.
That time,
I was in my mid to late 20s. So I'd already been producing work. I'd already been, but social media wasn't a thing. So when it finally became a thing and I started getting those friend requests from people from my old youth group who I haven't really talked to for like 10 years,
wow.
Right? And then them, adding me to Facebook and then being like, who's this person?
Yeah, because
I'm like, I'm the same person I always was, but I'm not hiding it anymore. And so that was like both a big blow up of friends and a big culling of friends as well. So that was a little bit of growing pains again, but it reminded me of why so often I am not very interested in being friends with staunchly religious people, because they do not leave space for me or people like me or people who disagree with them. There's no, yes, we can disagree and still be friends. There isn't that. For the Christians where there was, I am still friends with them. My closest best friend of 20 years still calls herself a Christian. We don't really talk about it, but that's also healthy for us. It's like, we don't need to. You accept me and you love me. I accept you and I love you. We don't need to go down. And she also said to me too, when she did take me out to dinner once to tell me she was Christian, she's like, I feel like I'm coming out to you. And I'm like, because I had so much hurt from the church.
Yeah, your journey there.
Yeah. That she'd heard a lot of the ranting, being a best friend. So then to her to feel that she was now becoming a Christian, felt like she was in some way betraying me. And I felt, no, your journey is your journey, and how you're getting from A to Z is for you. I said, and if you have space for me, then I'm here. And if you decide that you don't have space for me, well, then I will miss you, but it's also your loss. And she said, there's no God that I would ever worship that would deny someone like you in my life. So, or that would decide that you deserve hell if, hell even exists. So I was like, okay, well then, it's a non sequitur for our friendship. It doesn't really, it's not relevant. So
not relevant to how we communicate.
But I don't feel that is offered very often from a lot of religious people. Spiritual people, on the other hand, which was my comment on your post, can be very different, because it can be very syncretic. And for people who don't understand what a syncretic religion is, for a lot of people hold syncretic religions, and which is more of a personal belief system where they pick and choose from different, more established religions and create for themselves a belief system. I suppose a simplified version of that, but yeah. And it can look very much like a religion. Like, you can look very much like Christianity, or very much like
you have the same kinds of rituals and things that you do that make you feel connected to your higher power, whatever you class to call it, God, higher power, the universe. We all know that there's many different variations of what spiritual people classes, the divine, right?
Mm-hmm. And like my mother's new one is the beloved. So it's like, you have however people want to commune with that side of themselves, if they feel that they need to, I'm not here to deny them that. I don't think that that's my place. I think I am personally, I love reveling in my imagination. And that might insult some people who feel that, well, my beliefs aren't imaginative. And I was like, they are, because they are non-falsifiable and they are non-provable. So that is belief. It is faith, which means it isn't fact. And embrace that, which means you can also change it if you feel that it no longer suits you. It doesn't, because it isn't set in stone. Now, religion, on the other hand, is a different beast. It is set in stone. There is a book. There is a list. There are things you can and cannot do. And if you think that the word of God is immutable and it's, written in the Bible and you can never question it, well, then you can never question it. And so that isn't changeable. But spiritual people can change and grow. And it's much more liberating to consider yourself a spiritualist instead of a religion. At least that's what I've seen amongst people. The people who, like my mother, who still ascribe very much to a lot of Christian beliefs, but at the time now wouldn't really necessarily call herself a Christian anymore. But she is a poet, and she writes for and organizes this large group of thousands of spiritualists in an online community. And it's very interesting because it is syncretic. It takes pieces from all these different religions that she's been studying and all the different theologies, and sort of meshes the truths of them together. And in her, I have seen a happier growth, a more joy, more reveling in the beauty instead of reveling in all the do's and don'ts of life.
Yeah.
So I think there is, as your discussion was what is the place of spirituality versus religion in the gay world? Well, most religions are pretty clear. You can't be gay.
Gotcha. So what do you say to those people and say, like, yes, that was the past, this is now, things have changed, yada, yada, yada. And they talk about how, because you hear people who will say, yes, definitely that was the old things of the past, but things have changed. So what do you say to those kinds of people who will say that? I mean, I have no idea about how easy it is for the word of God in the Bible to be changed, but, maybe you can enlighten us a little bit more on that kind of a topic.
Well, I think that that stems from an idea that you can evolve the Bible. Well, that would not be a Baptist idea. That is not something a Baptist would consider. And although, now women can speak in church, the Bible says they can't. There's plenty of things in the Bible that we do not adhere to or we did not adhere to as Baptists. But so that they already did pick and choose, to be fair. So to say that we're now no longer choosing the homophobia, it's fine and dandy. It's all happening because there are fewer people attending your churches, and you realize that more and more people know gay people or trans people or non-binary people, and they are not seeing the love at the churches. And so if you want people to fill in those seats and you want people to pay into those coffers, because ultimately that's what religion is, it's a business. And it's one of the most money-making businesses on the planet. Do not deny it. It's the truth. So whether that hurts people's feelings or not is kind of irrelevant. It's just a truth. It makes a lot of money. Now, some of that money goes back to charities. Some of it does not. Some of it goes to the pastor. You pay the pastor, you have a giant building in downtown Montreal, it's like, it goes to all of that stuff too. So it is a money-making business, and they need to fill in those seats. And if nobody's going to be showing up, then that church is going to close. So they're just responding to pressure. So they'll change their theology when it suits them, which shows that they don't have much conviction in their theology to start with.
Business, yeah.
Yeah. Because if you're willing to change it based solely on attendance, which is ultimately what most of them are changing it for, is to get more people interested in their religion, because they're realizing, particularly I can speak of North American and European cultures, we're becoming more and more accepting of variety in the gender and human expression of sexuality. So the church really isn't. So you get this, brunt where the head of the church butts up against the head of, what is considered acceptable in society now. And homophobia is not considered acceptable. And even though it is rampant, let's not get it wrong, it's rampant, but it's kind of like a social faux pas. Like, you kind of keep it to yourself. If you're a homophobe, you shut up, but churches can't do that, right? Their whole thing is to preach. So they want to try to change the dialogue so they don't have to preach about that specific thing anymore, by just avoiding it most of the time, or saying you're all welcome. And when you say, well, what about me? You're welcome too. We love everyone here. Great. Well, what does the Bible say about, my lifestyle? Well, that's a different discussion. Well, yeah. So I'm not really welcome as I am. I'm
welcome to come and pay your money, but not welcome to
really got it. Welcome. Fill in the seat. Be
the
here.
Table. Yeah.
Yeah. But not really as I am.
So you I noticed through reading your comments, one of the things that you made clear, which I think is quite obvious for a lot of people, is that religion and religious scripture was written by straight white men. And a lot of it is, for a lot of people, think that it's racist, that it's sexist, that it's homophobic, and a lot of other ways. What do you kind of have to say about that in relation to the Bible and it being written by, like I said, straight white men?
Yeah. Well, I think arguably too, it's too limiting to say just straight white men, but straight men generally. I mean, a lot of it stemmed in the Middle East as well, although it's been translated and spread over most of the white world, particularly speaking of Christianity. And the philosophy and control of the church is definitely white-centric. So that is more where I was leaning with that. But if you actually go back into like the Bible, it was Middle Eastern, generally speaking, North African. But anyway, that little part aside, straight men, absolutely. It was men. All of the people writing for the Bible are basically men, or they were in charge of eliciting the control of what actually ended up in the Bible during the Council of Nicaea. It wasn't women. It wasn't minorities. It wasn't anyone who wasn't in full power and control. And from one day to the next, the Bible went from having many more books, all the Coptic books and everything else, and the Gnostic Gospels, to having all of that cut out, to being what we now call the Holy Bible. And, it was absolutely used to control anyone of any dissenting view, or anyone of any sort of meekness, let's put it that way. So women, children, minority races, queer people, anyone of difference was used. The Bible, particularly, I can speak to that religion, was used to control those subgroups and get them in heel. That's why women were not allowed to talk. That's why women still can't be priests in the Catholic Church. You want to say that we've advanced. You want to say that God made everyone equal, then why can't women be priests? That's a simple fucking question. And their answers are all crap. And it's all sexism. That is so simple. Just the one. You don't have to go very far to find more of that. So, and I don't see any difference for my Muslim female friends or my Muslim queer friends. I feel that although I can't speak much to that religion outside, I'm just an outsider in it, but I've seen them suffer with it. And I remember one actress who was Muslim that I was acting with, and we were doing the children's hour, and she has to play this woman who I don't know if you know the show The Children's Hour, but it's a very old play, and it was the movie Shirley MacLaine and Audrey Hepburn. You can watch the movie for people at home who's like, I can't go to see a play, but you can watch the movie. And it's these two teachers in an all-girls school, and this one girl starts a lie about the two teachers being in love, and it turns out that one of the teachers is in love with the other one. But she didn't play the one that was the lesbian. She played the other one. And she was so anxious on opening night because her parents were coming. And she wasn't even
the lesbian,
the queer character. She just had to love the queer character enough to say, I accept you, basically. And just that was so intimidating for her to present in front of her parents that I was like, oh, I see you. I can see you. I know you. I was like you. I get it. I was like you. I may not know the ins and outs of your religion, but I've been where you are. And it turns out years later, she is queer. You know, I remember I saw her a decade later and she'd cut off all her hair, and she had tattoos and piercings. Some of those things I know aren't really accepted. And she was wearing shorts and a tank top, and I was floored that, you know, this was the same person. And she said, well, yeah, her parents, it took 8 years for them to start to talk to her again. So I'm like, yeah, I see you. And I just, so even though I can't really speak to that religion, I do think that all religions have that issue where they create a system where there is only one way to be. And if you don't fit that, or you want to challenge that, or you want to ask why I can only be that way, that discussion is so shot down, so closed off, so finished, that for the person who finds that it's not just a discussion I want to have, it's literally who I am, that there's no more space for them there. And they do one of two things. They either go to an offshoot of a religion, like, you know, a lot of my Baptist friends now are United Church members, you know, which is one of the more liberal Christian churches, and you know, no longer Baptist, but you know, so they do that, or they end up leaving the church altogether and either follow another path of spirituality, or they end up where I ended up, which was agnostic atheist. So it just depends on, but once you start to challenge a religion at its core root of silencing the questions, silencing the challenges, not allowing a discussion for things, saying it's like, this is how it is, and there's no discussion to be had about it. For people who don't fit that, or people who love someone who doesn't fit that, that's never going to be enough. So they're going to keep challenging it. Even if they go to that church till they die, they're never going to feel the same way they did about it before they started having these challenges. Yeah. And so when I say that it's used to control those groups, it's used to make them silenced, to make them adhere to the rules, fit in the cube, behave. And when you look at who's in charge of that, it's men. Yeah. Most of the world's problems come back to misogyny. And men aren't the only ones who perpetrate misogyny or perpetuate it either. So it's, misogyny is such a struggle for our world, and it has always been. And I hope it won't always be that way. And I really hope that even if they can just stop a little bit of it in religion, I think that'll change a lot, particularly for women and queer people. Yeah, I totally agree. So obviously, you know, I know that religious trauma is a real thing. It's a big thing that happens to a lot of people, especially a lot of queer people. So I'd love to hear from you, Danniel, about your experience with the religious trauma. How did it affect you, and is it still affecting you, or how long did it take you to actually get over that kind of stuff? Because as we shift our beliefs, we still might deal with a lot of the pain that's there, even if our beliefs changes, but we still might have trauma, right? So talk to us a little bit about that. Well, trauma is like, if you think about it like a tattoo, you know, you got tattooed, and yeah, it might fade over the years, and you can wear clothes that cover it up, but you always have that tattoo. That tattoo is going to be there. I was raised in a church. I struggle with still wondering about the universe. I struggle with what if I'm wrong? I struggle with, what ifs, right? And the nice thing about a church is it tells you the answer to all the what ifs. This is what you need to do. This is where you need to go. This is how you need to behave. Everything's going to be okay. That is really wonderful if it works for you. And that is really wonderful if you fit the map, right? Like,
yeah,
I would have loved to have been a straight man in the 90s. I am 6 foot. I'm white. I'm reasonably good looking. I'm reasonably fit. I'm reasonably well off. It would have been great. I'm like I have all of the things. Then I come out as, a queer and, an artist and not really feeling either like a man or a woman. So it's like, I'm like, what? And none of this stuff works. So my trauma, particularly, because again, we can really only speak to our own experiences.
Correct.
We can study other ones and try to present them like I hope I did my friend from Toronto Justice, but I'm telling her story about the play. But the only ones that we can really own are our own. And for me, we had this this thing that happened for my brother with his teacher, and that was the first bell of the end of church. So what happened was we had to move provinces, as I said, because we were being harassed. And then my sister's teacher was charged as a child molester as well, not of my sister. But so then my mother said, none of my children are going back to school again. Screw this. 2 of them would have been taught by predators. And
these are people who you're at a school that's like a religious school, right?
No, these were just regular public school. At this point, we're still in just regular public school. So then she decided she was going to homeschool us. Well, she's a well-educated woman. And so she studied and got us into an accredited program. And so when we did go back, I went back to high school for grades 11, 12 and OAC, and then university. So I did 3 years of high school and public school system afterwards. But I was so far advanced because you were able to have one-on-one teaching for my mother. And she ended up teaching a whole bunch of other students that either were flunking out from other kinds of trauma. She ended up being an accredited school herself, ultimately. So she was quite an amazing woman. But that started the bell of, leaving what was sometimes a world that showed me other ways to be, right? So I remember, though, my mother didn't want me to participate in any of the Halloween activities when we were at church, because, of course, that's demonic. And so for the whole month of October, my grade 5 desk was moved into the hall. So I would sit in the hall by myself for all my classes. So already I knew that there was othered, so and I was othered because of my religion. So of course, then I didn't understand that, like, what's wrong with the pumpkins, Mom? And what's wrong with this? And, we'd argue about going trick-or-treating because all our friends were going and, we weren't allowed. And then sometimes we were allowed and other years we weren't allowed. And it would just depend on, what the pressures were that year for my parents, I guess, and from their church as to what, side of the coin they were falling on. So then we moved to Nova Scotia and we ended up being homeschooled, and we went to a more religious Baptist church than before. And that's one where the revivalist came. And then when we moved from Nova Scotia back to Ottawa at the time, we went back to a different Baptist church, and that had a really great youth group. And in so many ways, it was really, really wonderful. It was great camaraderie and wonderful people. And it was a great place and a safe place to be a youth. Also, that particular one was run very well. I've heard horror stories of other ones, but there were some things that are glaringly bad about it. So I remember the time when I would have been about 15 or 16, and we went on a revival trip to Toronto for this big church revival, mass church thing. Lots of I think to see Billy Graham. I think that's what it was, and see him speak. And one of the things we did was we worked with a youth outreach program. So one of the tests was we all needed to go and be homeless for an evening and beg on the street to get dinner, to understand what it's like to be a homeless youth. And therefore, when we were helping at the shelter or something, then we would better understand what their day-to-day things were. Well, we were all into the downtown core of Toronto. And of course, then me, curious as hell about being gay, went over to the gay village. So I was like, I want to see what this is like. And for starters, I made the most money of anyone, and which was all donated eventually, right? But it was like it already broke it was a disconnect. You're telling me these people are evil and wrong and perverts and all of this stuff, and they were the ones that wanted to help me. They were the ones that were reaching out to me. They were the ones that wanted to buy me dinner. They were the ones that, wanted to take me to the shelter. They were the ones that were giving me cards of this youth support group. And they were the ones that, I was like, what? And I remember going back to the rest of the group and thinking, this has to be, a fluke or something. And I remember the pastor leading that one, not ours, who was the one that was in charge of the revival thing. He said, well, in that community, often they were probably trying to groom you. So, it didn't really have anything to do with them wanting to help you. They were actually predators. And I just remember looking at him, and I said to him, you're wrong. I know what predators are like. And that broke. I was like, that broke it. I was like, you didn't listen to me. I told you they weren't predators. I know what a predator is like. It's like, I had to move provinces because there was a predator after my brother. I know what this world with a predator for a young person can feel like from the young person's standpoint. And I did not feel that when I was with gay people. And I was like, well, if you can be wrong, so fundamentally wrong about that, you must be able to be wrong about a lot of other things.
Yeah.
So I started questioning the other things. And of course, then I went into a big rebellious depression stage, which a lot of teenagers do, to be fair. That doesn't necessarily have to do with religion, but mine really did have a lot to do with religion, and I acted out. And then eventually I left home and went to university, got out as soon as I could. And the reason I wanted to leave home was because I did not feel like I could actually explore my sexuality with my parents around. I did not feel like it was a safe environment to do that. And the scary thing is I don't think that was them necessarily that made me feel unsafe. It was that they were part of a group that made me feel unsafe. And just them holding that title over their head saying, I'm with, so-and-so, I'm this kind of person, I believed them. So it's like, well, if they're like that, then you must be like that. And so I really can't feel safe with you. And when I started going back as a younger adult, challenging it with my art and stuff in my early 20s, and I did a show called The Corruption of Flesh, which was all about demystifying often Celtic religions, but I was also going into the whole realm of where modern religions are from, and both an installation art and a live performance and a book, and it was a whole thing. And then I was on the cover of Extra, which was a big gay broadsheet magazine, and on the top I was in a crown of thorns, and I had multiple arms, and I was correcting the crown of thorns, and it was bleeding down my face. And then inside I had the stigmata, and I was with a halo and a hairless dog, and it was all done up like iconography for the show. And that was the first time I really pushed a button that was really public, that got a lot of backlash. And I was like, oh, you can't even challenge your iconography. You can't even challenge this. I didn't say I was Jesus. I didn't say I was God. I was discussing this topic. I was discussing my childhood trauma. I was discussing religion and belief systems and the beauty of nature. And all you did was bastardize it. And all the posters for the show were torn off all over town. No one, but then the night of the show came, and for the opening night, we were we were standing room only. It was so packed that we had to bring in extra room, and then we had the fire marshal had to tell us we couldn't let anybody else in. So I'm like, people say, one thing, but they all want to watch the show. So it's like, even if they want to hate it, they want to watch the show. Yeah. And that was a lesson too. So I'm like, they're hungry for blood. This isn't a new thing. They did this back in Rome. They used to put early Christians in front of like lions, right? This isn't a new thing. We like taking things that are different than us and watching them fall. And turns out it didn't fall, right? And of course that pissed off some people, and other people were so happy about it, right? It was an interesting sort of a world for me to start to stretch in. But I really came to terms with my religion over probably a 10 to 15 year period. I'd say it took about that long for me to really start to unravel all the different little insidious ways it had woven itself into my identity. Your
belief systems, everything. Yeah.
Everything from what you do during the week via Sunday. It's like, to think of that as a holy day, to think of that as a day of rest, to think of that as a special day in some way. Like stores used to not be allowed to be open on Sunday when I was young, right? And I remember my parents protesting that. I remember my parents going to anti-abortion rallies. I remember this is like, and now I'm thinking like, what? Like, how could you think that way? And they don't really think that way anymore. They were caught up in the movement at the time. They were caught up in the group think, so to speak. And being a child, you're so often ignored, that you're so often just the observer of events, that they don't qualify you as a participant, which is wrong. You're participating.
You are.
You're there. The child is listening to you. You may think they're just 5 and they're not going to remember this. Well,
You're modeling everything that's happening. And especially from your church, from your family. Those are the things where we get the most of our belief system is those early days. Yeah.
Exactly. And so much of those things aren't even spoken. They're just enacted around you.
And you make your interpretation of whatever it means to you with everything else that's going on as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like they often say about people who grow up in an abusive home, they end up more likely to accept abuse in their life because they grew up with it being an acceptable form of, or an acceptable expression of love. And because it was around them. And so if it's not around you, you can see it as foreign, and that's easier for you to take a more intellectual approach to. So to be able to take an intellectual approach to my religious belief systems, it took a separating myself from the pack. And then it took a lot of time to go through and research and study and reading challenges of it. And because for the longest time, I still believed in God. I still believed in the Bible. And then I became, quote unquote, agnostic, which is like the I don't know answer, right? And eventually I still hesitantly call myself an atheist. And people say, why is it hesitant? And I'm like, because people misconstrue my lack of belief in God for a wish that you don't believe in God, or a belief that you shouldn't.
Correct.
I don't think that that's my view. I think for me, it's like, I wish you didn't feel the need to look outside of yourself for a justification for your existence. I wish you could find that in yourself, but not everybody can do that. And some people need to look up. Let's just say that. Some people need to look up. And I'm like, okay, you need that. I can accept that. I don't need to come around as a militant atheist going around telling everybody who is religious that they're an idiot. I don't think that's really helpful. I don't think everyone who is religious is an idiot. I think you just need to accept as a religious person, though, that some people aren't going to agree with you. And you believe you are right, but it's a belief. And you might feel it really deeply, and it might feel like fact, but feelings are not facts. And no matter how much you want to feel it is true, and you want to believe that it is true, it is still those two things. So that's my kind of atheism, is that I don't believe in God because there's no proof for God. I'm not going to deny people their spiritual journey. I'm not going to deny them their belief systems. I'm not going to deny people who believe in ghosts or who believe in fairies, who want to, commune with nature. I've had incredibly spiritual experiences in nature. I don't need to justify them to anyone else, and I don't feel that other people need to justify theirs to me. So when I say hesitantly atheism, it's because people ascribe things to me then. And I'm very averse to people ascribing things to me without asking me first.
Of course.
And that comes from years and years of being a Christian. And I'm like, there's a lot ascribed to that. And that's why I think people need to be careful when they take on titles of things. I am a Christian. I am, or I'm a Baptist. I'm a Catholic. I'm a Muslim. I am Hindu. It means all the things it means. Atheism just means nothing. Ultimately, it means I don't believe in it. That's it. I believe, all the people that, who believe in different gods, people at one point believed in all of these gods in the Greek pantheon. And, Christians, I'll speak this to like some of my Christian friends who might listen to this. I was like, you don't believe in those gods. Well, I just believe in one less God than you. Yeah. It's really that simple. It's not more complicated. It doesn't have any more theology around it. It doesn't have any more dogma. There aren't any rules, and so, but to say you're a Christian, there is dogma, there is theology, there are rules. Yeah. And so when you do wear a title like that, you don't get to just say I'm a Christian, but all those things don't apply to me, and that I'm not responsible for the belief systems of a church that I ascribe to. You absolutely are. You're the only person that's going to change those belief systems if you don't believe in them and you want to change your church. You're the only one who can. They're not going to listen to me. It has to happen from inside. So we do have those movements in churches where people are changing and growing and expanding and believing in one less part of the Bible. Like I said, one less God. They believe in one less part of the Bible. Now gay people are welcome. Maybe one day they'll let trans people. Maybe they'll one day let women participate. It's like, maybe they won't. But it's only going to happen from inside. And then to say that I'm a Christian, but I'm not that kind of Christian, that's a cop-out, and it's weak. And I think that it shows a lack of character and a lack of understanding of what you just said. Like it's like I'm purple, but I'm not that kind of purple. That's purple. They're all purple is purple. Like if you're purple, you're purple.
Well, I'm gay, but not that kind of gay.
I'm lavender.
I'm not that. I'm gay, but not that gay. It's the same silly thing.
I'm not that gay. What is a good gay person? right?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not gay enough. You're not this enough. We do this in every
Am
community.
I too much or am I not enough? These are the questions that we get asked by, and it happens because of the, like I said, the segregation, the you're not right, you're wrong. This stuff that we talk about with religion, society, with the media, that makes us question those two major things, right?
Yep. And I think that you brought that up right there with the community. I think that that was something that I had to untether myself from too, is I see this starting, well, not starting. I think it was when I first joined, LGBT plus community groups and all of this kind of a thing. We didn't have rights. So it was like everyone's, nose was to the grindstone to get basic rights. We weren't really as infighting as I see now. And I see the pigeonholing, which using the acronym alone gets larger and larger and larger. And I'm not affronted by having people being able to see themselves in the acronym, but the acronym will never be long enough. It will never be long enough to include every variety of person. So there's always going to be someone who does not feel included, because what you're doing is you're creating very small categories with rules. To be gay man, you have to be this. To be, I say I'm queer. That bothers people. I don't really very much like saying I'm a gay man, because I don't really feel that much like a man. I don't know what being a man is. I don't feel like a woman either. I don't think I'm trans. I'm queer. So I'm like, I'm queer. I'm who
I'm
I am.
Danniel. I'm Danniel.
Yeah. And so I really don't like, I use he, him pronouns. It's, I always have. I'm not planning to change that. I'm not going into those things. What I'm trying to say is that you have the people who want to put everyone in a category.
Into a
It's
box.
like I have
Yeah.
all these jars on my shelf. There's the lesbian jar, there's the bisexual jar, there's the demisexual jar, there's the trans jar, there's the non-binary. You have to fit into one. Well, what if you don't? What if you fit in multiple jars? Right? It's like, how do I fit into the community? And this we learned from other organizations. We learned that you have to make a rule book for people to follow so that they know how to walk down the road, basically. It's like, how to walk your life as a Christian. These are the rules. How to be in the gay community. These are the rules. There are no rules. That's a lie. There's no categories long enough that are going to fit every single person. And there's no way that we can express the breadth of human experience. And one of the biggest beauties I see as a potential possibility for the queer community or the LGBT plus community or the rainbow community, I kind of prefer the rainbow community, because I think it kind of just says like nothing. It's like, if you consider yourself part of it, you're part of it. That's pretty much it, right? Like, we don't need gatekeepers. Are you an ally? Yeah, you're part of it. What are these gatekeepers? You're not trans enough. You're not non-binary enough. You're not the right kind of trans. You're not the right kind of gay. You're not the right kind of lesbian. You're a gold standard lesbian or a silver standard. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gross.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
It's like, yeah, as a joke by a stand-up comedian, yeah, it's funny. We can all laugh. But you get serious about it, and people do. And they really invest in these labels. And one of the things I really loved when I first came out was I thought that there were no more labels I had to ascribe to. I thought I could just be me. And I'm seeing this dangerous trend in our communities where that's changing, that you need to ascribe to this label. Like, I've had so many people try to label me. I'm kind of, have a following on TikTok, and I challenge lots of different things there, but I do it in a sort of comedic voice. And I have a lot of people in the comment section, or a lot of people in the things like, are you this? Do you consider yourself that? Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, for starters, I'm not meat for you all to be eating and biting on. I'm not a bone to gnaw at. I can choose how much of myself I'm going to share with you, and you're not entitled to anymore. On top of that, I don't need to be any of those things. I don't need to be just those things. And I think that was one of the things that I struggled with coming out of. That was a damage from my religious upbringing, was this feeling that that's not true, that you do have to ascribe to something, that you do need to be a part of a group. You need a label. You are Christian, but we weren't just Christian, we were Baptist. So, it was like, other Christians like Catholics, they're not Christians. You're Lutheran, well, you're not a Christian. The only real Christians are Baptists, right? I see that same dialogue in our communities now. And you're not enough. You're not this enough. You're not doing it right. And we need to stop that. That's not right. We need to say, if you consider yourself part of our little umbrella, you want to come in out of the rain under our umbrella, then you're welcome to come in out of the rain, however you are. Yeah. And that's the community that I want to be a part of.
I love that. So I've got one final question for you, Danniel, then. And I guess maybe you just said that, but if I'll ask it anyway. For young people out there, or for anyone really who's part of the rainbow community, who is, maybe questioning their religion or going through these kinds of experiences, or even questioning spirituality, what advice would you give to those people out there?
Oh, that's a hard, because it's everyone's different and everyone is in a different place. But if I can make it relatively universal, I would say you are worthy of all the things that bring you joy. You're worthy of being loved, and you deserve to have as good of a life as you can give yourself. And if there are things that are holding you back from that, or there are people that are holding you back from that, or people who don't want that for you, then sometimes those things or those people need to be parted with. And it is really hard. But it doesn't matter that it's hard. The universe doesn't care that it's hard. It's hard. It's always going to be hard. Life is hard. But it's so much better when you can go to bed liking yourself, and you can go to bed in a place where you feel at peace with who you are. And if you can find that, however you need to find that, if you can find that, take it, hold it, go for it. If that's in your identity, if that's in your religion, even if you find a place that bridges all of it, go there. I don't want to deny people what they need to find their joy. And I don't want to be the kind of people that try to deny me joy and love in my life as a man who's been married for 19 years. So it's like, I'm very happy with my life, and a life that I never thought was ever going to be for me. And I never thought that I was ever going to be entitled to. And I was really wrong. And for that young person who's listening, who doesn't know what they're doing, or they're in their house, particularly someone who's too young to not be out of their house, and they're still in their house, and it's a house that doesn't feel safe. There are houses that are safe, and there are people out there who will love you, and you can come and stand under our umbrellas with us out of the rain. We're waiting for you.
Yeah. Beautiful. Such sage advice, Danniel. Yeah. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you and hearing more about your experiences and the wisdom that you have from that, because I believe that from this, there are so many people that can take some such sage advice from it. So thank you so much for coming on with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel honored.
You are so welcome, Danniel. And for the rest of you out there listening, if you have any questions or reflections or thoughts, feel free to, comment below, or send, me a message. Of course, we only want to, come from a place of love. So if you want to spread hate, you can do what you like. We can't stop you, but just know that we're probably not going to respond to that kind of response. We only come from a place of love. So knowing that, if you want to share with us, we'd love to hear whatever you have to say. And I'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, always remember that you've got this, And I've got you. Bye for now.